Working in Korea is actually like walking in a very delicate, confusing line because although you're full time, you're employed, you're working, there's always this feeling of uncertainty when it comes to your position, you as an employee, and your responsibilities. Hello, this is Justin in the second part of my HAJA series, HAJA episode 2. And after I've mentioned about life here in South Korea, working in the Korean company and exploring the work culture here in South Korea, I just want to bring out some information about working with Koreans as a foreigner here in South Korea. My aunt, who currently lives here in South Korea as well, has been working for a long time in Korea, has always been giving me advices when it comes to dealing with Korean employees. And the best thing, probably the most important thing I have remembered from what she said, is that to make sure that the Koreans see you as an ally, as a partner, as a friend, instead of being a competition. What I mean by this? So, for example, in a workplace setting, you have different roles, different responsibilities, but you're in a certain specific team. So, for example, in my case, I'm a staff. I have supervisors, I have my manager. But the thing is, even if I'm just a staff and I have supervisors, there's an overlap when it comes to our responsibilities. Sometimes their tasks are something that I can accomplish even if I'm a foreigner, especially that I'm a foreigner. For example, their projects are related to international partners and they unfortunately cannot speak English or find it difficult to speak English. So they would tap me, ask for help, probably give the responsibility to me. But in terms of paper, the responsibility is theirs, but in terms of action, it's with me. So if they see that you can do what the Koreans can do, there's a tendency for them to see you as actually a competitor instead of an ally, and that's very difficult. That's very difficult for the foreigner because as foreigner in Korea, we don't have certainty when it comes to our working life here. Um, there's possibility of getting laid off, getting terminated, your contract not being renewed, these things. And it's very important to have a relationship even if with your staff, your supervisors, because these relationships matter. These relationships matter when it comes to these things. And for example, your boss would ask the supervisor how your output is, how your project is. If the supervisors don't like me, or we have tension, or probably they see me as a competition, there's a tendency for them to speak negatively. And that's not good for me. As an employee in here in South Korea, there's a very it's very difficult to navigate. I'll be honest with you, it's very difficult to navigate, and you should always present yourself as if you are willing to give a helping hand, and instead and not a competitor. Probably up until now it's hard to understand, but for example, you're vying for a position, you're vying for a promotion. If they see that you're in their way of becoming promoted, it will be very hard to establish a relationship. For example, since I'm a foreigner, there are things that I cannot do on my own. Therefore, I would need help. If for them I'm a competitor, they would not really help me. And this applies not just in the workforce, but also in schools. So, in the universities, in the graduate schools, if they see you as a threat, for example, you have good grades, you're in the competition for the summa cum laude position, they would be very secretive, very protective. Because in South Korea, awards matter. There's a certain prestige when it comes to seeing you're the one of the top students. That's very big here in South Korea. I know some people would say that no, in the modern days, these things don't matter. But in South Korea, wherein merit is based on your output, performance, grades, achievements, this is very important. So again, if you are seen as a threat, that's something that can make them very distant and probably think, okay, I should be limiting my interaction with this person because the end of the day he or she would be a competition for me. And that's not something to take against Korea or Korean culture. It's deeply rooted to the idea of working hard. Probably you've heard a lot of about in this in the news that Korea is one of the countries with the longest working hours. They do work at least 10 to 12 hours a day. And historically, that helped them progress in their economy, their society, their wealth. So up until recently, they carry this idea of longer working hours equal to wealth, productivity, which in contrary, Korea is one of the least productive countries based on their hours input in their work. That's very contradictory, but that's how it is. So, if you are planning to work here in South Korea or considering working here in South Korea after the Global Korea Scholarship Program or whatever scholarship program you have here in South Korea, or even you're studying the Korean language, this is one thing that you could consider, probably think about. I am I presenting myself as someone that's very helpful, very kind, or am I presenting myself as a threat? So, among Koreans, Korean and foreigners, that's one thing. But there's a different story when it comes to a lot of foreigners because for us, probably the only difference, probably the only competitive advantage we have over other foreigners is the ability to speak Korean. So, if your Korean is good, there's a very high chance that you'll be able to get employment and be able to sit in the table, present, discuss, or do presentations. But if your Korean is not that good, well, probably you'll be assigned to more foreigner inclined or probably English inclined tasks. And for sure, one of the biggest market for foreigners here in South Korea is actually teaching English. But there's a very limited, countries they hire in terms of um, nativity in English. At the same time, if your degree during undergraduate or graduate studies are inclined into teaching English, they would probably give you merit to that. But yeah, I just thought about this earlier when I was actually working because I just realized since I'm the only foreigner in my association, my company, I cannot really compare with the others if I have other foreigners in the company. But how I see it, there's still this distance. Even if you're well adapted to the culture, there is still this distance when it comes to treating Korean to Korean and Korean to foreigner, which I totally understand and I really appreciate my workmates because they try their best to speak English, probably explain themselves in English if I find it difficult to find the vocabulary. But yeah, that's one thing I really like. And probably I'm just lucky. I was lucky when I got this job because my manager speaks English. He's able to communicate his and share his thoughts in English, and even my vice chairman tries his best to speak English. And then actually I remembered one discussion with my manager when we were in the office and he said, when you're trying to talk with the vice chairman, try to talk with him in English. And I was actually confused at first, but probably because they want to hear more thoughts from me. And if I try my best to speak in Korean, it's very vague for them. Because actually my Korean skills sucks. So I'm not really that good in Korean. But also, I think my manager and also my vice chairman is trying to practice their English speaking skills because recently we've been dealing with a lot of foreigners. Our projects are more towards international market. So I've actually became so busy this past few weeks, and that's something I really appreciate because I for sure would have more job to do. And that's one indicator for me if I'm enjoying my job is actually if I'm being busy and probably getting stressed with the responsibilities, because stress for me is a sign that I'm doing something. And probably there are instances when I feel like I'm getting bored at the job or getting bored at the workplace if things got so comfortable and everything became routinary that there's no dynamic workplace already. And that's very dangerous for me because sometimes that's the sign for me to find another job. But good thing, so far, it's not the case. Yeah, so that's the episode 2. If you're enjoying this series, Hada, probably give more comments, give some inputs, what you want me to discuss next. And probably I'll explore more these topics about working in South Korea, finding jobs in South Korea, because as I know, a lot of you are very interested of living here in South Korea after your studies. And probably if you have the credentials, instead of studying, you can actually start working in South Korea. That could be a good topic. But for now, bye bye.